Looking for magic cards? At flipsidegaming.com you can now use the promo code LVD to get a 10% discount on orders over $10 while supporting the channel at the same time. Hello and welcome to another modern gameplay video. Today we're taking a look at Dredge, featuring the full 4 copies of Creeping Chill out of Guilds of Ravnica. So the Dredge deck is pretty straightforward. We've got a bunch of cards with the Dredge keyword on them. One of those is Stinkweed Imp, and the goal of the Dredge deck is to get one of those Dredge cards in the graveyard, and then on the following draw step we can replace our draw step by putting the top cards of our library into our graveyard. In the case of Stinkweed Imp, it has Dredge 5, so we put the top 5 cards of our library into our graveyard, and then we get to return Stinkweed Imp from our graveyard to our hand. But the entire goal of all these Dredge cards is to fill our graveyard as quickly as possible with cards from our library, and then we've got a whole bunch of payoff cards for doing so. So let's take a look at our entire deck list here, starting out with our enablers. These are the cards that help us put the Dredge cards in the graveyard in the first place, and one of those is Faithless Looting, letting us draw 2 and then discard 2. So this is a great way to discard Dredge cards from our hand back into our graveyard if we've happened to already dredge them back to our hand, or if we started with our Dredge cards in our opening hand, then looting is a great way to get them back in the graveyard so we can start dredging again. And of course, if we already have a Dredge card in our graveyard, looting also lets us dredge right away, since it replaces each individual draw step with a dredge, so we can potentially dredge twice with a single looting. And looting also has flashback for 2 and a red, which means that if we mill it over with a dredge, we can still get a lot of value from a looting in our graveyard. Then we've got 4 copies of Shriekhorn, a 1-mana artifact, starts out with 3 charge counters. We can tap the Shriekhorn and remove a charge counter to mill ourselves for 2 essentially, so this is another way to try and fill our graveyard. And then we have Cathartic Reunion as another great Dredge enabler, since as an additional cost to cast a Reunion we have to discard 2 cards and then we get to draw 3, but that's actually the preferred order most of the time, because that way for holding a Dredge card we get to discard it as an additional cost to the Reunion, and then when we take our draw 3 we can actually replace each individual draw step with a dredge potentially. So we can start out by dredging, for example, Stinkweed Imp that we just discarded, and if we happen to mill over more dredge cards we can dredge those with our second and third draw step as well. So sometimes when you cast a Reunion on turn 2 you could end up with 15 cards in your graveyard by just dredging a bunch of Stinkweed Imps, which is very powerful. Then we get to our dredge cards. We've already mentioned Stinkweed Imp, 3 mana for a 1/2 flyer that essentially has Death Touch and has Dredge 5, so most of the time we're just going to be using this to dredge. Every now and then we're going to cast it as a 1/2 creature to beat down with or trade with a large creature from the opponent, but it's mostly here to just dredge and fill the graveyard. Then we have 4 copies of Life from the Loam, which has Dredge 3, but unlike Stinkweed Imp, we're actually going to cast a Life from the Loam pretty often as well, since it lets us return up to 3 target land cards from our graveyard to our hand, which is great in combination with Conflagrate, as we'll get to in a second. And then our last Dredge card in the main deck is 2 copies of Golgari Thug, which has Dredge 4, and also like Stinkweed Imp we're not going to cast very often, since when it dies it actually has somewhat of a drawback of letting us put a card from our graveyard on top of our deck, which is mandatory. Now we get to the payoff cards for dredging. We've got 4 copies of Narcomoeba, 2 mana for a 1/1 flyer, and when Narcomoeba is put into our graveyard from our library we can put it on the battlefield instead. So this is a nice free 1/1 flyer that we can get if we happen to mill it over with one of our dredges. Then we also have 4 copies of Bloodcast, which is a 2 mana 2/1 that can block. It has haste as long as an opponent has 10 or less life, and whenever we play a land we can return Bloodcast from our graveyard to the battlefield. So that's the way we get the Bloodcast back once we do put it in the graveyard through Dredge. And then we also have the full 4 copies of Prize Amalgam, 3 mana for a 3/3 zombie that says whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if it entered from our graveyard or if we cast it from our graveyard, then we can return Prize Amalgam from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped at the beginning of the next end step. So both Bloodcast returning from our graveyard into play as well as Narcomoeba coming into play will both trigger Prize Amalgam, so that's another great way to get a body in play for free essentially by just dredging and putting a bunch of cards in our graveyard. And then the latest payoff card for putting cards from our library into our graveyard is Creeping Chill, a sorcery that deals 3 damage to each opponent and we gain 3 life for 4 mana, but if Creeping Chill is put into our graveyard from our library we can exile it, and if we do then Creeping Chill deals 3 damage to each opponent and we gain 3 life. So we essentially get to cast it for free, but it's also uncounterable, which is another upside. And then last but not least, we've got 3 copies of Conflagrate, which is often the finisher in our deck. We're not super interested in casting Conflagrate out of our hand, but instead we're very interested in the flashback. So Conflagrate, if we're casting it out of our hand, is double X in red to deal X damage divided as we choose among any number of targets. So very expensive and clunky way of dealing damage. So instead we're interested in the flashback mode out of the graveyard for double red, which lets us discard X cards to pay for the X in the mana cost instead. So a great combo with Conflagrate is Life from the Loam, since we can dredge Life from the Loam out of our graveyard back into our hand, so we can always have access to it. We can cast it to fill our hand with lands, and then we can discard all those lands to a giant Conflagrate to finish off the opponent or to take out multiple creatures. So this is often how the deck closes out a game after getting in some early damage with all the creatures, and now also with Creeping Chill. And I should also mention Conflagrate as kind of being an enabler as well, since you can just cast Conflagrate for X equals 0, and then get the Conflagrate in your graveyard, and then you can pay the flashback cost and just discard a whole bunch of your dredge cards, so you can start dredging on the following turn, just using Conflagrate kind of as a way to put the dredge cards from your hand into your graveyard. And then taking a look at our mana base, our deck is mostly interested in red mana, since those are the cards we're actually casting, whereas we're not actually casting these other cards very often. So we've got 2 basic mountains alongside 7 fetch lands, 4 wooded foothills and 3 bloodstained mares, which can also get our dual lands besides our basic mountains. We've got 2 blood crypt counting as both a swamp and mountain, and 2 stomping ground counting as both a mountain and a forest. And then we've also got 1 mana confluence, which can occasionally help us cast a prize amalgam or an Archamoeba, making blue mana. And we also have a 1 of Gemstone Mine, which can do the same, doesn't cost us any life unlike Mana Confluence, and if it goes to the graveyard after 3 uses, we can still get it back with a Life from the Loam potentially. And then finally we have 4 copies of Copperline Gorge, which comes into play untapped if it's one of our first 3 lands. Then taking a look at our sideboard, we've got 2 copies of Thoughtseize against combo and control decks. We've got 2 Lightning Axe as removal that can also help us discard dredge cards out of our hand. We've got a Dark Blast as a cheap removal spell that has Dredge, so we can keep getting it back if we need to get rid of multiple 1-toughness creatures. Then we have 3 copies of Nature's Claim to deal with artifacts and enchantments, since of course our deck has to be prepared to deal with the graveyard hate after sideboard, which often takes the form of artifacts and enchantments. Then we've got 3 copies of Ancient Grudge as a way to destroy artifacts, also as flashback for single green, so if we happen to put it into our graveyard by dredging, then we can still get a lot of value from it. And then we have the full 4 copies of Leyline of the Void as our graveyard hate of choice. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the draw. And how about this hand? We've got a Looting to discard a Loam, which we can start dredging. It's not the best hand ever, but it's probably keepable still. And what are we up against? Turn 1 Razorverge Thicket into Slippery Bogle, so we're up against the Hexproof deck. Alright, I don't think this is a great matchup for us, since if our opponent can get a lifelink enchantment on one of their Hexproof creatures, we're going to have a hard time racing it. And of course we can't kill it with Conflagrate. So let's lead with a Looting. And alright, Stinkweed Imp is a nice discard alongside. Could discard a Conflagrate as well as insurance, but probably just want to discard a Life from the Loam first. So discarding Conflagrate could have worked out in case our opponent played a turn 2 Core Spirit Dancer, which we need to kill right away. So that would have been a reason to discard Conflagrate instead of Life from the Loam. But by discarding Life from the Loam, we make it so if we dredge the Stinkweed Imp and don't find another dredger, we can at least dredge the Life from the Loam right away. Opponent's got an Ethereal Armor on their Bogle, nothing else, so a relatively tame start from the opponent here. But next turn they could easily play a powerful enchantment to go alongside the armor. So let's dredge the Stinkweed Imp here, dredge 5, and alright, we found a Bloodghast and a Prize Amalgam, so that's not bad. And there's not much else we can do this turn, so we're probably just going to play a tapped Blood Crypt. Could also Conflagrate for 0, just to have it in the graveyard for the future, which might be worth it. So let's play this tapped. Get back Bloodghast, which gets back the Amalgam end of turn. And then I'm just gonna Conflagrate for 0 here to get it into the graveyard, so that we can use a flashback mode next turn if we want to. So we get an Amalgam back, but if our opponent has a Daybreak Coronet here, we're gonna have a bad time. And instead it's a Spirit Mantle, alright. At least they don't have lifelink yet. And a Gladecover Scout. So our opponent has a 4/4 protection from creatures and first striking Slippery Bogle. So we go down to 14. And now we can dredge our Life from the Loam. which finds not much. Alright, so what's our plan? Probably just want to conflagrate discarding our entire hand so we can discard the Stinkweed Imp here. The other option would be to flash back a Faithless Looting so we can discard Stinkweed Imp that way. Don't know which is more important. We don't have any relevant cards in hand that we actually want to cast. Could potentially need a third land in play if we want to flash back a Looting, which might be correct here, in which case we only want to discard 5 to the conflagrate. Yeah, I can get behind that, so let's conflagrate our opponent for x equals 5. And we'll discard everything except for the fetch land, maybe. And I'm not going to play the fetch land yet in case we dredge over a Bloodcast next turn with our dredge from the Stinkweed Imp, so we want to keep the land in hand so we can potentially get it back. And then we'll attack with both. Should have definitely attacked first here to give the opponent less information to work with here. And our opponent's going to chump block the Prize Amalgam right away. So this makes it so any future Bloodcasts don't have haste yet, which could be relevant. Alright, let's say go. So next turn we are dredging a Stinkweed Imp, and then we can play land and potentially flash back a Faithless Looting as well. Opponent with a Slippery Bogle. Dried Arbor as their land for the turn, 1/1 creature. So they have some blockers, but they're only getting in for 4 currently. No lifelink yet, and our opponent's down to 1 card in hand. So we do have a chance here. So let's dredge Imp. And what did we reveal? 1 Creeping Chill. Anything else important? Not really. So let's drain the opponent. Down to 10. We've got 1 mountain left to get with our fetch land. And then we'll flash back a Looting here. We'll dredge a Stinkweed Imp with the first draw. And that finds a second Stinkweed Imp. And then we'll discard 2 of them. Alright, so what did we find? A Prize Amalgam, a Bloodcast, which won't be coming back this turn, sadly. So let's just get in there for 5. And the next turn we might want to consider dredging a Life from the Loam so we can enable landfall for Bloodcast. We'll see. Opponent is down to 8. Gets in for 4. We are down to 8 as well. And that's it. So if we dredge back a Loam, we can get back lands which enable landfall for Bloodcast, get back Amalgam, and also fills our hand for the conflagrate that we have in our graveyard. So I think I like getting back Loam here. And alright, we found an Narcomoeba and Creeping Chill, so 2 good hits. We get to drain the opponent once more. And we get a 1/1 flyer, which also enables Amalgam end of turn. So let's see, can we kill our opponent? If we attack with both, opponent chumps Amalgam, takes 2, down to 3. We could Loam back 3 lands, play a land, so we have double red for conflagrate. And then we'll still have 3 cards in hand, so we can deal 3 damage to our opponent with the conflagrate here. So yeah, I think that's the plan. And I guess we can also get a hasty Bloodcast, so that also helps. So yeah, we want to Loam before we attack here. So let's get Mountain, Gemstone Mine, and Blood Crypt. And then we get to play our lands, trigger landfall, get a hasty Bloodcast. But yeah, I don't think we even needed the hasty Bloodcast here to win the game, unless our opponent has interaction with their last card. So let's attack. Send in everyone. Opponent chumps Amalgam. And our opponent's fetching with the Windswept Heath, interesting. What do they have here? Alright, nothing, so they were also just dead to the conflagrate here, so the fact that they fetched didn't really matter. So, on to sideboarding against Bogles. They're going to bring in the Rest in Pieces. So we want Nature's Claims. We could also consider Thoughtseize, but if they keep in all the Leyline of Sanctities, then Thoughtseize is not going to be too effective. So we don't have a lot of answers for the Rest in Peace if we don't bring in the Thoughtseize as well, so I think we do, and then just hope they don't have a Leyline. But of course if they have Leyline, then our conflagrate becomes quite a bit worse as well. At least Creeping Chill doesn't target, so it gets past the Leyline of Sanctity. So what are we cutting for triple Nature's Claim and double Thoughtseize? I think one Conflagrate, since we're not actually killing their creatures with it, since they all have a hexproof. Then we can probably afford to cut 2 Narcomoebas, since opponent has plenty of ways to give their creatures trample or protection from creatures, so Narcomoeba's not going to be blocking a whole lot. Could also consider cutting 1 life from the loam, since again we're not relying on the Conflagrate plan as much. And then I think I'll cut 1 Bloodcast as well. Try something like this. Alright, what about this hand? We don't have any answers for a Rest in Peace, no Nature's Claim or Thoughtseize. It is a functional hand in theory. Reunion discards life, which starts dredging, but I think I'm gonna mulligan to look for some more interaction here. Alright, we didn't find any interaction, but we did find, I think, a better hand, thanks to the looting. And Wooded Foothills we want to keep on top, since we do need a second land at some point. Alright, no Leyline of Sanctity on turn 0, that's good. And a turn 1 Slippery Bogle. And just cast a looting here, or do we Shriekhorn? I think we looting, since we know we can discard a Stinkweed Imp to it. And hope they don't have a Rest in Peace on turn 2 here. Alright, Amalgam and Conflagrate to draw. So we're definitely discarding Stinkweed Imp, and then the question is, do we discard a Prize Amalgam, or do we discard a Conflagrate in case we need to kill a Core Spirit Dancer on turn 2? I think we'll discard an Amalgam still. And say go. Alright, let's hope to dodge a Rest in Peace. Alright, it's going to be an Ethereal Armor instead. Into a Rancor, so they're going to get in for 5 on turn 2, which is not bad. But at least we get access to our graveyard for a turn here. Let's see what we can do. We milled over another Amalgam. And no Bloodcast to trigger the Amalgams. So here we're just going to fetch for a Blood Crypt, I think. Could also get Basic Mountain. That might actually be better, the 2 life from getting Blood Crypt for black mana. It's probably not relevant enough. Of course, if we don't have black mana, we can't cast Thoughtseize, but most of the damage has been done, our opponent's almost empty-handed. So I think getting a mountain makes sense. Cast Reunion, discard Stinkweed Imp and Prize Amalgam, and then we're hoping to mill over a Narcomoeba here so we can get all the Prize Amalgams out of the graveyard. Alright, we found Narcomoeba Creeping Chill, excellent. We can dredge a Golgari Thug, and dredge another Golgari Thug. Gain some life, get a Narcomoeba back, which very importantly triggers all the Prize Amalgams. Get all the Amalgams back. So we've got somewhat of a board presence now. So what's our plan for next turn? Don't have a third land, so flashing back looting's not an option. And alright, there's a Daybreak Coronet, that's what we didn't want to see. So now they get to give their Hexproof Bogle lifelink as well. Gets in for 9 points of Trample, Vigilance, lifelink and First Strike. So blocking with the Narcomoeba doesn't do much here. Down to 8, opponent back up to 26. And yeah, we pretty much have to draw a Nature's Claim here. We're just gonna take a normal draw step. And alright, we top decked the Nature's Claim, that's exactly what we were hoping for. Sadly, our opponent has 2 enchantments besides the Daybreak Coronet. Let's say they only had 1 of them, then we could destroy 1 of those to make the Daybreak Coronet fall off. But since they have 2 additional enchantments, that's not going to work. So we're going to have to destroy the Coronet itself. Then the question is, can we still afford to attack here, or do we have to play defense? Probably have to stay back. So we are just going to play a Shriekhorn. And I don't even think we get in with the Narcomoeba here in case they play another enchantment. And we need the extra 1/1 to be able to block the Bogle. Alright, they've got a Griff Spoon as well, which is going to make things a lot more complicated. Now the Bogle has flying, so which enchantment do we have to kill here? They're all pretty problematic. I guess we'll still destroy the Coronet here. Opponent gains 4, they now only have a 7-powered Bogle. Let's mill ourselves. I guess we're taking 7. Untap, and upkeep, we'll mill ourselves again. Find a Creeping Chill, but yeah, it's not going to be good enough here. Take a draw step, find a life from the loam, which can get back lands, which can enable Bloodcast to come back. But then we still need to find a way to deal with a Bogle, which has Flying Trample First Strike, and I don't think that's going to happen. Alright, let's pack it up. And go to game 3. So is there anything we want to change? I think we're okay as far as sideboard goes. Could be that the Thoughtseize is just too slow, but now we are on the play, so we could potentially Thoughtseize turn 1, get a Bogle out of their hand or a Rest in Peace. Could be that we didn't need Thoughtseize on the draw since we aren't able to take a Bogle out of their hand. But on the play, it's probably going to be worth it here. And I think I like the rest of the setup. And we do have a Thoughtseize, but sadly no lands to cast it. If we had one land here, this hand could be quite good since we have looting to discard double imps and a Thoughtseize. But without a land we can't keep. Alright, I guess we'll keep this. No interaction, but we do have a Reunion which we can cast, and we want to keep looting on top. We're on the play, so we're not going to get to cast it on turn 1. So my guess is we bottom it, and then our hope is just that our opponent mulligans into Oblivion and never finds a Bogle that they can play to enchant. Which is one of the fail cases of the hexproof deck, since they do rely on having one of their 8 1-mana hexproof creatures in their opening hand. But in this case, a Core Spirit Dancer could also do it. Alright, they do have a Glade Cover Scout. Shriekhorn a turn late. Probably still want a Reunion here, since we've got a Thug and a Life from the Loam to discard. We'll Dredge the Thug first, Dredge Stinkweed Imp, and Dredge a Life from the Loam. Find a Narcomoeba alongside 2 Bloodghasts. Alright, well, I've got something going. And a Conflagrate as well. So let's hope to dodge a Rest in Peace here. Untapped Temple Garden. Into Rancor, alright. At least no Rest in Peace. And a Griff Spoon as well, so we could trade off for an Narcomoeba for the Scout, so they can't afford to attack here, which is nice. So no Dredgers left in our graveyard to draw a Prize Amalgam. So we've got a few options here. We can Life from the Loam, get back some lands to get back the Bloodghasts, and then next turn we can flash back a Looting, which seems good. And then we can still play Shriekhorn here as well. So let's get back some fetch lands. Trigger Bloodghasts. We'll just fetch for a mountain. Play a Shriekhorn. Mill ourselves. And find a Prize Amalgam. And we're not going to attack with an Narcomoeba since it could potentially still hold back the Scout. And it's going to be a Core Spirit Dancer, which we can kill with a Conflagrate here. Unless they can enchant it right away, which they might. Nope, it's just going to be a tap Temple Garden. So we do have a decent shot this game. So upkeep, we want to mill ourselves with Shriekhorn. We can dredge a Life from the Loam if we want to, which I think we do. So the original plan was to flash back a Looting to fill our graveyard even more, but I think it's too important to get rid of the Core Spirit Dancer here, so I think we're gonna just flash back a Conflagrate and discard most of our hand, so we can get in some damage as well. I guess we can start by attacking with our Bloodghasts, since that's not gonna change. Opponent takes 4 down to 12. And now the question is, do we want to keep a land in hand? Do we want to keep anything in hand? Casting a Creeping Chill could also be somewhat effective, with our opponent at 12 already. How is our next turn going to look like? Probably just going to flash back a Looting after we dredge an Imp. So we don't necessarily need land number 4. Conflagrate Spirit Dancer for 2, and our opponent for 5. Could keep 1 card in hand to maybe represent a Nature's Claim, but let's just discard everything. Take out Spirit Dancer, put our opponent to 7. Alright, it's going to be a Daybreak Coronet again, sadly. Yeah. Could be that we need to take a natural draw step just in the hopes of top decking Nature's Claim. So we're going to take 7 again. They do have Trample, so jumping with Narcomoeba doesn't do much. Yeah, Daybreak Coronet kind of beats us by itself. And our opponent's empty-handed with Scout and Dried Arbor. So let's untap, mill ourselves with Shriekhorn. Alright, there's 1 Nature's Claim in our graveyard currently, so there's 2 remaining in our deck. What are we hoping for by dredging a Stinkweed Imp? So I don't think we can win without dealing with the Daybreak Coronet here. So we're gonna have to take a normal draw step. Find a mountain instead. Alright, let's flash back a Looting. And just gonna have to take normal draw steps here. Find a Creeping Chill and a Reunion. Alright, so this isn't getting us anywhere. Guess we'll keep the land in hand. But yeah, we can't attack here. And next turn we're taking another hit from the Scout. And we don't have any lootings left in our graveyard. Ethereal Armor makes Scout up to 11 power. But yeah, I don't think we have any outs at this point. And find a Gemstone Mine. Alright, that's not gonna do it. So yeah, Daybreak Coronet, pretty good card against us. So it could be that some of those Ancient Grudges should be Assassin's Trophies instead, as a more catch-all answer. Alright, on to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw. This hand seems keepable. Between the Shriekhorn and the Reunion, we can probably find a way to fill up the graveyard. Opponent with a Blood Crypt into Burning Inquiry. Discarding a Soul Flare. Alright, so we've got a Brew over there. And, well, did not discard the cards we were hoping for, but Burning Inquiry against Dredge can be a dangerous card, since if some Dredgers end up in the graveyard, then you're kind of helping the Dredge deck. So here, let's just fetch for a mountain, and we have to decide between Shriekhorn or Looting. Don't have any Dredgers in hand, so the value of Looting goes down a little bit. So I don't mind just casting the Shriekhorn first, and we'll mill ourselves right away, on the off chance that we find Amalgam plus Narcomoeba. So we've got a Conflagrate in the graveyard here, and we milled the Line from the Loam, which we can start dredging. So now, casting another Burning Inquiry would be pretty dangerous for the opponent. It's going to be a Steam Vents, so opponent on a Grixis graveyard deck, and there's Goblin Lore, which only affects the opponent. And anything spicy in there, some cycling creatures, so they definitely have a plan for the graveyard. Alright, so upkeep we can mill with Shriekhorn on the off chance that we find a better Dredge card. And we found a Golgari Thug, which seems worth it here. So let's dredge that one. And we found some Amalgams in the meantime. Let's Looting again. Dredge Imp. Dredge another Imp. And then discard both of them. Alright, we found double Creeping Chill Narcomoeba. So Narcomoeba will get back all the prize Amalgams. And a Creeping Chill is gonna burn our opponent for a bit. So not a bad turn. And I guess we'll just play a tap Stomping Ground for now. Get back a Bloodghast as well. Which, by the way, has haste, because our opponent's already down to 9 thanks to those Creeping Chills. So Creeping Chill definitely putting in work. So it's only turn 2 and our opponent's already down to 7, and we have 2 Amalgams in play. So it's gonna take something special here for the opponent. Looting, so we get to see a bit more of the opponent's deck. And we see a Zetalpa, which has some pretty nice keywords for Soul Flare. Alright, upkeep, we'll mill ourselves again. Another Creeping Chill, sure. And then we'll dredge a Stinkweed Imp. And there's a Conflagrate here which we can cast for lethal, and our opponent scoops it up. Alright, so that was a pretty swift victory here over Grixis Soul Flare. So what kind of graveyard hate can we expect from the opponent? They could have their own copies of Leyline of the Void. Given that they use their own graveyard, we probably don't expect to see cards like Relic of Progenitus, but they could have Nihil Spellbomb as well. So it's probably Nihil Spellbomb, maybe Surgical Extraction, and Leyline of the Void as potential graveyard hate cards. So Nature's Claim could be an okay inclusion. Is there anything else we want? I mean, we want our own Leyline of the Void, I guess, since our opponent's relying on the graveyard pretty heavily. And what do we get rid of? We could cut Creeping Chill, since this is not really a matchup where we're going to be racing, I don't think. Can maybe cut a Conflagrate, and then we can maybe shave some Narcomoebas as well. Try something like this. Could also be that we should not be bringing in Nature's Claims and just hope they don't have any graveyard interaction, and maybe adjust for game 3. And what about this opening hand? Seems okay. Don't have our own Leyline, and we don't have a Nature's Claim in case our opponent has Leyline, but still a functional hand, which I think we have to keep. And alright, our opponent does have Leyline of the Void, sadly. So, good thing we brought in Nature's Claims, but don't have them in hand currently. So this Looting is probably just going to get cast to help us find Nature's Claim. So let's fetch Stomping Ground and cast a Looting. Suppose we could have also gotten a black land in case we want to hardcast a bloodcast next turn. Opponent gets untapped Watery Grave. And they have a Stubborn Denial, fair enough. Looting gets countered. Opponent cycles Street Wraith. And passes a turn. I guess next turn we can cast Bloodcast. Could also cast a Golgari Thug here, don't know if it's worth it. Sure, our opponent's not doing much, they probably kept a bad hand based on the ley line. So attacking with the 1/1 might be worth it here. And then next turn we can play a Bloodcast, start beating down. But they might have a big Delve creature here. It's going to be a tapped Blood Crypt and still nothing. Alright, well. An Archamoeba, which we can cast thanks to Mana Confluence. So let's attack for 1. Bloodcast pretty close to having haste as well. Let's play Confluence, tap for black mana. Play a Bloodcast. Say go. And it's going to be a cycled Hollow One into a Scalding Tarn and still nothing. Alright, well. Let's attack for 3. And play an Archamoeba. Could use a Gemstone Mine as well now. Don't know if the life is worth it or if preserving the counter is worth it. My guess is that the life is more important. So play a 1/1 flyer for 2 mana. Say go. And we do have a Conflagrate in hand, which we could cast a Fairway next turn for X equals 2. So we've got a little bit of burn. So will our opponent be able to do something here? Our opponent with a Flamewake Phoenix on defense. Alright, let's draw Catharic Reunion. Not the best here, so we could just Conflagrate to kill the Phoenix, which is reasonable, since it does block our Archamoeba and Thug. Next turn the Phoenix will have to attack. And then we get to get in for 4. So if they have nothing, they would die next turn. I think we're better off killing the Phoenix here. So let's play our land. Fetch. For a mountain. Conflagrate for 2. And our opponent has another Stubborn Denial. Alright, that's too bad. So I think we just stay back now, wait for the Phoenix to attack us since it's forced to, and then attack with the team. So we'll take 2 down to 10. And another Phoenix on defense, which is being quite annoying here. So we might as well Reunion. And another Archamoeba is actually reasonable, so is Conflagrate. And we'll play an Archamoeba. And I think we paid a life since we want the land for Conflagrate. A Goblin Lore instead. So we're going to take 4 here. And we get to untap. Life from the Loam doesn't do much. So we can attack with everyone, which would be 5 damage, and we can burn their opponent for 2. So the problem here is that if we attack with everyone, we get in for 5 damage, put our opponent to 3, and Conflagrate's not enough. Plus, if we tap the Mana Confluence, we would die to the attack on the way back. So either we just get in for 4, keep an Archamoeba back as a blocker, or we attack with everyone, take 4, and then just try and kill him next turn without needing the Conflagrate. It is realistic for us to potentially kill him next turn, plus we have a Conflagrate for 1 at the ready. So I think that's the plan, just attack with everyone, hope they don't have a 3rd Phoenix. Leaving back Archamoeba plays better around a 3rd Phoenix, but attacking with everyone plays better around a ground blocker, preventing a bit of damage. So we're down to 1. And it's going to be a Rakdos Charm of all things. Each creature deals 1 damage to its controller. So had we cast a Conflagrate for 1 on the opponent last turn, they would have actually died as well and it would have been a draw. But we didn't. So yeah, that's going to kill us. So on to game 3. So we do want to keep in the Nature's Claims. I think I'm happy with cutting the Creeping Chills for the most part. So I think our sideboard plan's okay. Just have to hope they don't start with a Leyline yet again. And that maybe we start with one. And this hand seems great. We've got a Leyline, but we also have a Looting we can cast to discard some Dredgers. So it's even functional beyond the Leyline. And our opponent doesn't have Leyline this time around. But we did see a Rakdos Charm in the previous game that they could also have. And our opponent's just going to concede to the Looting here. so they can't beat the leyline, and looting was gonna set us up pretty nicely thanks to all our dredge cards. So on to the next one. Alright, we're on the play. And what about this hand? Seems fine. We don't have any dredgers, but we've got a Shriekhorn and the looting to help us fill the graveyard. And definitely gonna lead with a Shriekhorn here, since if we can find some dredge cards with 2 activations that we get, one in our main phase here and one next turn in our upkeep, then looting's gonna get a lot better. Alright, so Shriekhorn mills over 2 lands, not what we were hoping for. And our opponent on an Inquisition, which can get our looting. Alright, so our opponent could be on Junt. Upkeep, we're gonna mill with Shriekhorn in case we find a dredge card. And we did not. But we did find a Loam, which is good. So let's get our Blood Crypt here. We've got 1 left. And then cast a Loam, getting back 3 lands. And next turn we can dredge the Loam. We already have a Conflagrate in the graveyard and a lot of cards we don't mind discarding. Opponent says go, upkeep, we'll mill again. Find a Creeping Chill. So let's dredge the Loam here. See what we find. Alright, we milled over a Stinkweed Imp. Alright, so we have a few options here. We can flashback looting, which can dredge the Stinkweed Imp and hopefully find more dredgers. Or we could Conflagrate, discarding our Bloodghasts, keeping 1 land in hand so we can play the land and get back the Bloodghast right away, which will also have haste if we discard 5 cards at least. That's a very aggressive play, but I don't actually mind it here. Put our opponent to the test right away. Keeping Conflagrate for a creature could pay off, but getting in a ton of damage might be worth it here. So sure, let's go for it. We can Conflagrate for 6, since we do want to keep a land in hand. So let's discard those, put our opponent to 9, which will give our Bloodghast haste, after we play the Stamped Blood Crypt. And get in there. And next turn we can still flashback a looting after dredging a Stinkweed Imp. Opponent does have removal here, Bolt to kill the Bloodghast, that's fine. And our opponent falls to 7. So we could also decide to dredge a Life from the Loam instead, to get back Bloodghast. Opponent on Mardu. And it's going to be a Lingering Souls. Alright, that's pretty effective here at stopping our Bloodghast attacks. But our opponent is at 6, it doesn't take much to kill him. So now that they have Lingering Souls, trying to get back Bloodghast to attack doesn't seem as good. So I'm just going to dredge the Imp. So let's flashback looting. Dredge an Imp. Dredge a Loam. And then discard double Imp. And get a bunch of Narcomoebas, which will also trigger the Prize Amalgam. And then we might as well attack with our Bloodghast. So we're not in a bad spot here. Get back Amalgam. Next turn we can cast a Loam to enable landfall for Bloodghast. And there's 3 Bloodghast in the graveyard now. And it just takes 1 Creeping Chill here to finish off our opponent. So our opponent flashes back the souls. Let's dredge another Stinkweed Imp. And yep, there's a Creeping Chill. So that should just about do it. We can cast a Life from the Loam, getting back a random assortment of lands. Play lands, trigger Bloodghasts. And attacking with everyone should do the trick. Alright, so we got game 1 against Mardu. So how do we sideboard? What kind of graveyard aid can we expect? Opponent could easily have Surgical Extractions, they could have Nihil Spell Bombs, they could even have their own copies of Leyline of the Void. Nature's Claim's interesting, since of course it doesn't do much against Surgical. Don't know how popular Leyline is in the Mardu decks, but maybe with the resurgence of Dredge, they are playing a Leyline as well nowadays. Anything else we want in the sideboard? Dark Blast seems good since it can kill Lingering Souls as well as Young Pyromancer. And we could also consider our own Leyline of the Void to stop Bedlam Reveler and flashback Lingering Souls and looting. But I don't think we have to, since it also slows our deck down. So the only real question is whether we bring in the Nature's Claims or not. And my guess is we don't. And just hope they don't draw their relevant graveyard hate. And if they do have a ley line, then we'll adjust for game 3. So we're just bringing in 1 Dark Blast. What do we take out? I guess I'll shave a Narcomoeba, since it doesn't match up very well against Lingering Souls. And try this. And this hand seems decent. We've got double looting, double Dredge card. Just hope they don't have any graveyard hate here. Alright, no turn 0 ley line. And we are Inquisition proof, having 2 copies of looting. Alright, so let's cast looting. And we can discard 1 of each, or we can discard both imps. 1 of each seems okay here. And say go. Opponent passes the turn. We can dredge a Stinkweed Imp. And find double Narcomoeba off the bat. That's good. No lands to get back with our Life from the Loam. We could just cast it to get it into the graveyard, but there's another Loam and another Imp, so I don't think that's necessary. So we're just going to play a tap Stomping Ground and pass the turn. So definitely possible we should have discarded both Imps to the looting, but if they had a Surgical Extraction, exiling both Imps, that might have been worse than keeping 1 Imp in hand. Opponent's going to double bolt us. So maybe trying to fill the graveyard for a Bedlam Reveler. Alright, it's on tap, dredge another Imp, and double Creeping Chills, quite a hit, as well as a Bloodcast. Alright, so what's our plan here? Probably just flashing back a looting. Seems okay. Trigger Bloodcast, get a Blood Crypt so we have black mana in case we need to hardcast some Imps. But let's just flash back the looting. Dredge the Loam, dredge another Loam, discard 2 Imps, and attack for 2. There's also Amalgam in the graveyard that we can potentially get back. Opponent has a Fatal Push for 1 of them. Yeah, all these spot removal spells don't really line up well against the Dredge deck. So I don't think Mordo is particularly favored against the Dredge matchup. And Blood Moon's also not too effective against us since we mainly only use red mana. So they did have a Bedlam Reveler, which explains the aggressive bolts as well. So we get to untap, dredge Imp, find another Narcomoeba, get back Amalgam end of turn. So let's cast Loam, getting back some lands. And then play a land, should still be a mountain in our deck. Get back a Bloodcast. And then we can Conflagrate for 7. 4 on Reveler, 3 on the opponent, which is just enough to enable our Bloodcast as well. That just came into play, so that works out perfectly. And get in for 5. And we even have a 2nd and 3rd Conflagrate in the graveyard that we can eventually cast thanks to our Life from the Loam, but it might not be necessary here, as Prize Amalgam comes into play and our opponent scoops it up. So yeah, these fair mid-range matchups like the Mardu matchup are going to favor the Dredge deck pretty heavily, especially if the opponent doesn't draw any graveyard hate. Since the Dredge game plan lines up so well against what the opponent is trying to do, our creatures don't really care about spot removal spells all that much. So yeah, that's going to do it for today's gameplay. Want to thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day. I also want to thank all my patrons for being part of the channel, and you can become a patron yourself today and decide the topic of future videos over at patreon.com/LegenVD.